Good evening, everybody. Wow. So thank you for being here. On behalf of the University of Dayton, I'm honored to welcome investigative journalist Jessica Luther, who's with us for 3 days. And I will say she's two days into a schedule that is putting her in front of hundreds of students and faculty and staff, and really grateful to Jessica for working hard while she's here. Jessica is just the second writer to hold the Roger Brown Residency in Social Justice, Writing, and Sport. While the pandemic created more space between the first and second Roger Brown residencies than we would have liked, it did not diminish our commitment to continue to honor Roger Brown with this important recognition. I offer a warm welcome to all joining us tonight as we engage in a meaningful conversation around the intersection of today's sports media environment and social justice issues. Writers such as Will Haygood and George Plimpton, and athletes such as Billie Jean King and Curt Flood have long named wrongs and sought justice, and sports often have provided a lens into struggles to create a more just social order. That's why Jessica's work is so profoundly important. Through this residency, we celebrate the work of writers like Jessica who engage our students and our society in reflecting on how the roles of writing and athletics help us pursue a more just society more broadly. Their work is not easy and often draws criticism, as change is not always welcome, even when it advances justice. It's also important for us to remember the story of Roger Brown, for whom this residency is named. He was one of the most gifted basketball players to ever put on a Dayton Flyers uniform, but his college career was cut short after being loosely linked to a gambler involved in a point-shaving scandal in which he did not participate. Roger was never charged, but his reputation and his dreams were shattered when the university dismissed him. As we prepare to hear from our distinguished writer-in-residence, Jessica Luther, let's take just a few minutes to watch this video that explains well why the University of Dayton established this residency as a lasting legacy for Roger Brown here at the University of Dayton. When the video is over, chair of our communications department, Dr. Chad Painter, will come up and provide an introduction to our distinguished resident. Thank you very much.
He was just apparently just the sweetest guy growing up in Brooklyn. Obviously grew up very poor, but just had the sweetest disposition, would do anything for anybody. And you know, the sky was just the limit for this guy. He and Connie Hawkins were really looked upon as the two best high school players in the country coming out in 1960. And then, of course, you know, when the scandal erupts over fixing games, and, you know, Roger was never found to have fixed a game or even introduced anybody who fixed a game.
Picture Mr. Brown, far from home, a young man in a racially segregated town during a period fraught with racial tensions and great power differentials. It literally makes the heart ache to consider how alone he must have felt, indeed, how alone he must have been. His dreams of a college degree and a pro basketball career both dashed.
He was devastated because he really wanted to come back to UD and play ball.
Even though he did resurface and become a star again, he still lost most of what were probably the best years. And more important, I think he lost some of his soul. He lost some of his dignity. He lost some of that sweet disposition.
And he certainly passed way too soon for all of us. But I never forgot him. So he still lives in Dayton, and he still lives in our hearts and in our minds. And now it'll be even more visible to think about him in a positive way through this wonderful, wonderful project.
Mr. Roger Brown, one of the greatest basketball players ever to attend UD. Kind and gentle and thoughtful, still highly regarded in the Dayton community 22 years after his death, has been invisible at the University of Dayton. That is neither right nor just. So today, in the presence of Roger Brown's family, as well as friends, teammates, and contemporaries, and with an eye toward justice, we humbly yet proudly establish the Roger Brown Residency in Social Justice, Writing, and Sport intended to be a lasting testament to Mr. Brown's tenacity, excellence, grace, and commitment to doing what is right. This is long overdue and is intended to begin to make things right with the family, friends, and legacy of Roger Brown.
There seems to be a lot of sadness around his life about what happened, but this is a very triumphant moment. And I think hopefully that we all can start to wipe away some of the tears that always seem to be gushing around his life.
And now they will be using his example in a positive way. I really do have to think he'd be smiling. I can tell you, there's just a glow in everybody's eye right now.
This is really great. Yeah, I can see him smiling now.
Oh, I think he would be extremely pleased and happy and be beaming at the possibility of what this does, because it really goes beyond just recognition. In a situation like this where you honor an athlete, but you do it in a positive way that's going to add knowledge and wisdom and understanding to the community and to students, but also address social concerns.
This establishes dialogue, not only in sports, but also in the community and throughout the society as a whole.
The lessons learned are what's important, and there's probably no better way to do that than through students that, retain that information and go on to share that, on for many years. So it seems like it has a more lasting impact.
This exceeded all of our expectation, an outstanding educational experience that's going to last forever.
It's 50 years in the making, from my father's journey from Brooklyn to the University of Dayton and on to the Indiana Pacers and a Hall of Fame career. This is like the final step in his Hall of Fame career.
It's a wonderful comeback story, and it's also a wonderful lesson for students. That's the gift that he has given us all, and I'm very proud to be here as the first Roger Brown writer in residence.
Good evening. I have the honor of introducing Jessica Luther tonight. We'll just start here. Stick to sports. Tell that to Jesse Owens, or Tommy Smith and John Carlos, or Jackie Robinson and Roberto Clemente, or Billie Jean King, or Michael Sam, or Megan Rapinoe, or Roger Brown. All could tell you that sports rarely, if ever, are just about sports. Sports are cultural. Sports are political. Sports are an integral part of our social fabric. The best sports journalists, the David Halberstam's, the Jamel Hills, the Jessica Luthers, know that sports writing is a vehicle to discuss larger issues. Luther is an investigative journalist who has written extensively on the intersection of sports and gendered violence. She helped break major news stories about sexual violence at Baylor and Louisiana State Universities, as well as the Dallas Mavericks' toxic workplace culture. It's probably easier to list the news outlets where Luther has not published. She has written for ESPN Magazine, Texas Monthly, Deadspin, the New York Times Magazine, the Texas Observer, Austin Woman, Sports Illustrated, the Los Angeles Times, BuzzFeed, USA Today, and the Huffington Post, among others. She's authored 2 books, Unsportsmanlike Conduct, College Football and the Politics of Rape, and Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back, Dilemmas of the Modern Sports Fan, which is highly recommended, and you should all read it right now. Well, after this talk. She also co-hosts the sports podcast Burn It All Down, which you should also listen to. And in her ample spare time, she's writing a dissertation focusing on the intersection of race and gender, with a focus on the University of Texas women's basketball team in the 1970s. For these reasons, and many more, I am excited to introduce Jessica Luther, this year's Roger Brown resident.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I just found out from Chad that there were actually tornadoes last night, not just warnings at 4:30 a.m. on everyone's phone. So the fact that any of us are here feels like a real win. I want to thank the University of Dayton for asking me to be a part of this residency. It's an incredible honor, and I've really enjoyed over the last couple of days all the students, a lot of the students, and the faculty that I've been able to talk to about sports. What a job. Okay, so can we, yes, look, see, I didn't even think about how this was gonna get my face off of the screen, but that worked out really well for me. Okay, so we are here to talk about sports media and social justice. Look at that. Look at that cute kid. I love sports. I have been a sports journalist for about a decade, but I've played sports forever. My dad will probably watch this on YouTube and be like, that's my Trans Am. Hi, Dad. I played middle school basketball. You can tell that I have some height to me. I could not dribble, so that was limiting in my ability. But I was thinking about how to start this, and there was a part of me that wanted to tell you all that I love sports. And I was thinking about why I felt the need to do that before I got really critical about sports. I don't quite know what to make of that. But there is so much good in it, right? There's a thing we're fighting for here that at its core we deeply believe in. Also, those pictures, I was so cute. Okay. All right. So I got started in sports journalism because I went to the Florida State University. I didn't do journalism there. I'm a trained historian. But back in 2013, the most famous case at the time around sports and gendered violence involved Jameis Winston, who was the quarterback of what I at the time would have considered my football team. My parents went to Florida State. I went to Florida State. I met my husband at Florida State. And we found out then that he had been under investigation for sexual assault for 11 months by that point, and the team was moving towards what would eventually be a national championship. He would win the Heisman that year, all eyes on them. And I started writing about this as a fan. How do I feel as a fan? What are the things that I am thinking about as I'm reckoning with what I know about what has happened on my campus? It wasn't mine then, but the campus I had gone to. This morphed over time. So that was about a year later. This was the first investigative sports piece that I wrote at Vice Sports about, wild that they let me title it that. Did we have a lawyer? I don't know. But I wrote about the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. It was my first time interacting with Title IX. And I feel like I did not plan this, but I feel like I should explain what that is. Title IX is this 1972 statute, a civil rights statute that declared that if an educational institution takes federal funding, that they cannot discriminate based on sex, based on the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act around race. And so initially the big conversation was around sports. You can't discriminate in sports and still expect to receive federal funding. It's worked out well in a lot of ways. We could talk about that if you guys wanted to. It's complicated. But starting in '78, people were suing around sexual harassment under Title IX and their access to equal education. Under Obama, this became a much more solidified thing, but it does have a long legal history. The idea is that gendered violence is gendered. Most people harmed in gendered violence are women. Most people who do the harming are men. Obviously, there are combos there. And so the idea is that if you've been harmed, that your access to your education is probably going to become unequal. Are you able to go to class, or do you fear going to class? Are you able to access your dorm without worrying that you're going to be harmed again? And so that's the idea of how Title IX has become sort of the thing we talk about. That is the legal mechanism by which we discuss this on college campuses. It is a civil rights law. It is your civil right to have equal access to an education. Okay, so I wrote about it for Vice Sports. Chad mentioned some of this, so I apologize for repeating. But not this one, I guess. This was my first Sports Illustrated. The big case at Vanderbilt around a gang rape case involving multiple football players, and I believe all of them were convicted in the end. This was one of the few national pieces about it, so kudos to Sports Illustrated. I wrote this piece. That picture is so beautiful. I profiled this ballerina, and she had been repeatedly assaulted by her instructor when she was overseas with him, her dance instructor, I guess, and had severe PTSD from it, but was known in her community as a survivor and was asked often to perform, like to help other survivors sort of perform her survivorship. And it would cause her to have horrible PTSD attacks. And so the piece is a lot about like how you be a public survivor and what the cost of that is. This is a famous piece. This is the Baylor piece that Dan and I wrote in 2015 around sexual assault, and the Baylor football program eventually led to the coach, Art Briles, being fired, the athletic director being demoted, the university president, for the older people in the crowd, Ken Starr, being demoted, and eventually he left as well. This has become sort of this shorthand for Baylor, is like sort of now the shorthand for how we discuss the idea of sexual assault in sports. Here's my book, not about Baylor. Lots of Baylor people think it's about Baylor. It's about the phenomenon of sexual assault in college football and how institutions respond to it. Here's the Big Mavericks piece that I wrote with John Wertheim. You probably heard about because Mark Cuban went on TV to talk about it after it came out. They replaced a bunch of people on the business side of the Dallas Mavericks in response to it. Did this reporting with LSU. This is the most recent stuff I have on college football. Led most famously, if you know anything about it, it's probably that Les Miles, who had been the LSU coach, got fired at Kansas. They felt like he hadn't disclosed what he had done at LSU, which is true, but he also was not very good at coaching football, which is probably the more important thing. We helped that along, though. And then most recently, in April 2022, I wrote a piece about a gymnastics coach who had groomed girls for decades. And up until I interviewed a 15-year-old for the piece. And it was a lot about Safe Sport, which was the organization put in place to help with abuse cases after it was already on its way when all the Larry Nassar, Michigan State, USA Gymnastics stuff broke, but really was spurred on by that. But it has been, it is not great at what it does. And this is yet another story of sort of the struggles that athletes have in reporting coaches into the Safe Sport system. So that's kind of the breadth of, I had to show this, of the stuff that I've done on gendered violence. I did Burn It All Down. We actually don't do Burn It All Down anymore, but you can go back and listen to plenty. We did many episodes. I did it with my 4 friends there, and we did every week a different interesting thing in sport that was happening. And I'm using this as a segue because the other thing that I do a lot of is I like to write about women's sports because I like women's sports. And it's fun in a different way than, my other stuff is not fun. But I've written a lot. This is this piece I did about girls playing travel baseball. It has a short little video. If you go find it, there's a 1-minute long video of the girls. It's so cute. Women play baseball. There's a World Cup that I went to when it was in Florida. I think they're about to have another one. There was a huge break because of COVID. But I am like the person, apparently, who writes on women who play baseball. I went to France in 2019 to cover the World Cup, the Women's World Cup. I got to interview Cedella Marley, Bob Marley's daughter, about the Jamaican team. And then right before the final, they published this piece on the right that I wrote on purpose to piss people off, and I totally did it. I was really successful. On purpose. And I argued that I wanted women to break away from FIFA, that I don't think FIFA is doing much at all for women's soccer, and that women's soccer should consider being its own entity. And we can talk about, I'm happy to talk about that. I did write this book, Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back, with my friend Kavitha, and this really covers all sorts of things. I just like sports so much. Like the first chapter is about concussions, the last chapter is about political activism. There's stuff on there in doping, sports media, all sorts of things. I have written about fairness around anti-trans sports bills. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute. That was for Vox. It was really fun. I worked on this USA Today team about a series. There was a Title IX at 50 series, and I got to do the lead piece, which is about spending disparities, which was fun. It was hard. There was like a deep database. Like they had collected, USA Today had collected receipts. They had like all this information about how certain schools were spending money. And so I should have pulled it here, but like our big poll quote, there was a whole section about how Louisville men's basketball team spent $7,000 on socks. And the women, the biggest thing the women had ever spent money on was $5,000 on a Mac computer. And so I had COVID right before we published this, and I was very sick. But it was someone's job to call Louisville and ask about the socks. So I had to call the Louisville spokesperson. I had like a frog voice, and I was like, "Do you have anything to say about the $7,000 of socks?" He didn't know what I was talking about. And they didn't have anything to say. But that was fun. And then I always want to mention, my friend Amira hosted this, but I worked on the story editor. This is a narrative podcast about how Black girls went from the margins of gymnastics to the center of the sport. I'm super proud of this project. If you're into podcasts, sports podcasts, this thing I'm happy to say, I think it's very well done. So this is like sort of the breadth of the stuff that I cover when I do this work. And so, but I am currently working on a dissertation, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail here. I could do it for days if you would like me to. Please ask me about it. But I couldn't resist. There's so many great pictures. I came into the project because there on the left is Rodney Page, and he was the women's basketball coach at the University of Texas from 1973 to 1976. And when he was hired, it was an all-white women's basketball team. There were almost no black faculty at all on the campus of the University of Texas. It was very strange for them to hire a black man to coach the all-white women's team. But then he recruited that woman in the middle, Retha Swindell. She was the first black female athlete at the University of Texas. She was where's Cece? She was a triple jump national record holder when she was in high school. So there's Retha. I love this picture of Retha. She was on the U.S. national team that went to China. And I love her doing her hook'em on the wall. And they did, look at them. They are so cute. I love everything about this. So I study this extensively at this point in time. Happy to talk about it if anyone wants me to, but I won't hold you hostage. Okay, so let's talk about what we're here to talk about, which is sports media. And doing my dissertation means that I'm not doing Burn It All Down. I'm not engaging all the time in the sports and media realm the way that I would have been a couple of years ago. But I'm still hyper aware of what is going on there. And so I'm gonna start with the sad thing, which is the contraction of sports media. I don't know how much you all have paid attention. I feel like it is just constantly in my face these days. But when I was thinking about this, I remembered that when the AP, the Associated Press, was moving towards using AI, I think they began with business writing, but one of the first places that they did it, this was 2016, was they moved into sports, right? And so we're all having this crisis around AI replacing writers now, but even, I was gonna say 7, but 8 years ago, they were already doing that when it came to sports writing with the Associated Press, which is kind of, you can't get more storied. 2019, ESPN magazine shuttered. 21 years it had been running, had that amazing annual body issue that we all like so much. And 2020 was the beginning for Vox, which owned SB Nation, and SB Nation was famous for having like a site for every team. Like if you had a team in whatever sport, SB Nation had a site for that. Beginning in 2020 and then moving into 2023, they like basically completely decimated. I don't know what of SB Nation, if anything, exists today. I don't even think to go there. But then we have had this last year. I wanted to mention Vice Sports in 2017, Huffington Post in 2021, Bleacher Report in 2022, and BuzzFeed in 2023 either shuttered or had massive layoffs, especially around sports or investigative journalism. These are all places that I had just shown you that I have worked at. Just last week, there were strong rumors that Vice was going to be completely taken down off the internet. They have like fired everyone. And I had a panic moment where I went and downloaded the PDFs of like everything that I had written. It does not look like they're actually going to delete the entire site, but that's sort of the state that we're all operating in at this point. This still doesn't seem believable to me, but in June of 2023, the New York Times ended its sports department, announced that The Athletic would be taking over all of the sports coverage. If you go today to the New York Times sports coverage, you go to The Athletic. That's where it directs you. The same time that they announced that they were going to end the sports department for the New York Times, they also announced that The Athletic, which was famous for all of its beat reporters on all of its teams, that they would end that at the same time, that they were moving to more generalized coverage. So if you were looking for that kind of personalized team coverage, that the New York Times, which that's in theory why they bought The Athletic, was no longer going to be doing that. The LA Times sports section in July of 2023 stopped doing basic things in the paper. No more box score, standings, game stories, TV listings, daily sports calendar. And then just last month, they had another huge round of layoffs. And so the LA Times does not have a traveling beat writer for the Dodgers, the Angels, the Clippers, the Kings, the Ducks, the Sparks, LAFC, LA Galaxy, or Angel City, which is pretty wild to think about. In a city that is about to host the Olympics. What is happening to their sports department of their major newspaper. Real Sports ended after 29 years on HBO at the end of last year. Again, a thing you just kind of always assumed would like exist. Last month, Sports Illustrated laid off almost everybody. I think they gave them 90 days, so they're technically still there, but they're about to not be there anymore. I don't know a ton beyond that. There are some people still there. My friend John that I write with, he is still there. He's sort of they just wrote an article in the Washington Post about Sports Illustrated, and he was like the sad staffer who is quoted. It's hard to think about sports media existing without Sports Illustrated. It's really weird. Bad sign. And then I wanted to mention The Messenger, which most of you probably don't know. It existed for less than a year. And I'm mentioning it totally, like, out of nowhere, shut down earlier this month. But the thing about it is they had hired so many amazing sports writers. They had pulled them from all kinds of places, promised them all this stuff. It looked like they had funding. They had spent it on themselves. And they just all of a sudden shuttered it. I think, like, they literally took it down. I think if you go to The Messenger, it just is a static page at this point. All the work that everyone did in that short period of time is even gone. That's a lot if you look at it. Like, it's just like I was gonna just put all this up, and I was like, that's too much to look at once. And so, like, people have been asking me over the last few days, like, where's media going? I literally have no idea where sports media is going. Okay, it's not all bad news. I like sports, I promise. We still have WAPO. We still have The Ringer. And The Athletic, man, like, I can't say enough things about. I mean, I mainly read it for women's soccer and women's basketball, and that's phenomenal. The women's soccer stuff is phenomenal. And I was just talking about this beforehand, but Defector, which is my favorite cultural commentary on sports that exists. It was the Deadspin team before they were all laid off, and they went and they collectively the journalists own The Defector, and it's run a lot on subscriptions, and they seem to be doing okay. They actually publish all of their financial information, so you can go look it up and see like how they spend their money, where they're getting their money from. All of that is very transparent, and they just do really, really good and funny, smart work there. And then I wanted to mention like one space that has so much potential, and we'll talk about this again later, is women's sports. So there on the left, that's called The Next. It's a newsletter, you cannot read it, but at the bottom it says powered by The Nine, the IX, which The Nine is also a newsletter about women's sports. The Next focuses just on basketball. I swear I get like 6 emails a day about women's ball from all the writers at The Next. The Nine is more of a Monday is about soccer, women's soccer. Tuesday is about tennis. Wednesday is about basketball. Like they're trying different things in order to get information to us. And they do amazing work. And then on the right, this is my friend Lindsay. She runs Power Plays, which is a no bullshit newsletter about sexism in sports. It's great work. So there is like other avenues. I was asking my friend last night, I'm like, where do you get your sports news? And she said Reddit. So people are like looking for these things, but it is so hard to figure out this day and age, like where to go. I always used to start with the New York Times and Deadspin, and I feel unmoored in that way. Sports are popular though. So as sports media is contracting in ways that are concerning, people keep watching sports. Right? So Variety tells us that in 2023, of the 100 most watched things in prime time, 56, more than half of them were live sports. Of course, it's the NFL that is the leader, but NBA, NCAA, March Madness, college football a little bit. That's incredible. Like when you think about still how popular this thing is that we do not have that we have a media infrastructure around that is crumbling in a lot of ways. College football playoffs this year, highest since 2018. The Super Bowl was literally the most watched. The Super Bowl we all just watched is the most watched thing ever in the US historically. Taylor Swift and all that. Absolutely. But it is fascinating to think that like this is the main thing. And then I just wanted to mention that sports matter to live streaming, like to these streaming services, right? That's where so much is moving just in general and how we consume media. But you think about like Thursday Night Football on Amazon Prime, MLS season pass, MLB, whatever, on Apple TV. NFL has all these online things. My friend Chris used to watch a lot of F1 stuff by streaming it. WNBA League Pass I've had forever. I just watched the U.S. Women's National Team play this week on Paramount Plus. Like that was the only way that I could access it. So at this moment, when we are seeing so much go away as far as the media around sports, sports continues to be gigantic and in itself incredibly important to this type of media, this broadcast media, right? And so let's get into it. So who reports on sports? I'll let y'all guess. So TIDES, the Institute for Diversity and Ethics in Sport, bless them, gives us actual stats all the time on this. And they put out their racial and gender report card for, as it says, Press Sports Editors, Associated Press Sports Editors. They do it every other year. So this is the latest one that we have. We are about to get one, I assume, for 2023 sometime this year. It'll be interesting to see how they handle the analysis now that we have seen how much has gone away just in the last few months. So the one that we get 2 years from now will actually be incredibly interesting. But TIDES. So they evaluate over 100 newspapers and websites. They're looking at sports editors, assistant sports editors, columnists, reporters, copy editors, web specialists, upper management positions, and then they give grades. Overall grade, a C. Racial hiring, B+, let's go. Gender hiring, a big fat F. For 2021, this is part of, I took this right out of the actual report. For 2021, the grade for racial hiring practices for APSE, newspapers and websites was a B+, which was an improvement over the B from 2018. The newspapers and websites received a 6th consecutive F for gender hiring practices, despite increasing by 2 points from the previous study. The combined grade for 2021 was a C, and while still a poor grade, was a significant improvement from a D+ earned in the 2018. This is bleak stuff. 6th consecutive F. And so the guy who runs Tide is Richard Lapchick. Super fascinating guy. You should Google him later and read his Wikipedia page. But he wrote this piece for ESPN about the report where the title makes it very clear, what the conclusion is. Sports media remains overwhelmingly white and male, study finds. I put this up here in part because it just is very clear. What else is there to say? But he wrote it for ESPN, and I want to mention this because every time they do the Tides report, they always mention that if you take ESPN out, because you might be thinking, but I see a lot of black people, women on my television screen. Probably. If you take ESPN out, everything gets much worse. And so they actually will go and recalculate everything based on ESPN not being part of it, and all the grades get worse. So ESPN, and kudos to them, are actually doing a lot of the work, and which is great because we visually see a lot of that on our screens. That's important. Also a problem in a lot of ways that one place is really propping up. Well, one's an F, but B+. And I just wanted to draw attention to this intersection here. Lisa Wilson, the former APSE president and key advisor to the study, she said, "We've seen some signs of progress, but it remains a major problem for women, and especially women of color. We need more women in this industry. We need those voices. We need that perspective. We need them making coverage and hiring decisions." And I just wanted to put this quote here because that is a particular intersection that this reveals all the time. Women of color, black women in particular, have a very small role in all levels of sports media to this day. So while women in general, a problem, black women, women of color in particular, just horrible. Okay, and then I had to include this because this is just the best chart. So the Women's Media Center, they do a status of women in the US media all the time, and they will, let me see, it says, they took 109 studies and reports. There was original research by the Women's Media Center, aggregated research from academia, industry, professional groups, labor unions, media watchdogs, newsrooms, other sources. They literally go through and count how many women have bylines, how many men have bylines, how many non-binary writers have bylines, how many they can actually assess that for. And they put it in this chart. Okay, so black are the women, red for the men. Just keep on going down. Just keep going until you get to the very bottom. There's something particularly depressing about it being under obituary. I don't, it's really in the ground. Sorry, but there's something about that. That is horrible. When you see this visual of exactly how many men, there, I made it big for you. Can't miss it. I don't know, I always find this so jarring, and I guess we can only go up. Cross your fingers. Okay, so I think this matters for lots of reasons, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the stories that we are talking about today, the ones where we need these perspectives to be way more diverse than this. Obviously, one of the hottest stories in the whole world, it feels like, name, image, likeness, the labor of college athletes. Just this week, the NCAA's compensation rules for NIL, a judge said no, that's violating antitrust. We have the Dartmouth players who have gone to the National Labor Relations Board and says they are employees and they can unionize. I don't know. EA Sports is finally bringing back its college football game now that they can do NIL. They literally stopped making it because they did not have the rights to the name, image, likeness. It was a big legal gray zone for a long time. But this is pretty amazing. 11,000 NIL offers. That's how many college football players there are that are going to be in this game. 11,000 of them. They're going to get $600 plus a copy of the game. This is fascinating. Athletes would remain in the game for their entire careers, but could opt out of future editions if they chose. Athletes who remain in the game for multiple years will be paid annually, and players who transfer will continue to be compensated as long as they are on the roster. That's phenomenal. How much choice these athletes have around their name and their image and their likeness being in this incredibly popular video game. It's been a big deal for female athletes too, and we can certainly talk about all the complications around that. There are all kinds of discussions around inequities that, as it says, are exacerbated by NIL. Most clearly, athletes have now sued at the University of Oregon around Title IX, and I think this has to do with the collectives that they're creating at these booster collectives that they pool all their booster money and then pay athletes to come to the schools, and I assume they're not doing it for female athletes. So we now have I assume federal Title IX lawsuit around this, right? We absolutely need a sports media that can handle the intricacies of this, the economics of it, the gender of it, the race of it. And for someone like me, name, image, likeness is just the beginning. It's not actually pushing on the financial scaffolding of college sports. That is money that is coming in from the outside. It's not asking college athletic departments to figure out how to pay the athletes as employees. That's why the Dartmouth thing is incredibly interesting. This is a huge story, and we absolutely need as many people as we can get looking at this. There was just someone interviewed Nick Saban, and this man was paid $12 million by the end of his time at Alabama. I think he had $70 million left on his contract when he walked away. And he was like, I'm glad for the players, but now this is all they want to talk about. What about education? And I was like, what about education? It's been a really long time since that was the concern. Maybe NIL makes that clear, but this is not a new phenomenon. So I'm interested in how sports media will handle this moving forward. I totally just took this from Deloitte. You can see at the bottom, I just took it. Women's sports is so popular. It's not as popular as men's sports, but it is this incredible market that no one has tapped for a very long time. They are trying to figure out, if you want to grow a market here, this is the easiest way to do it. Deloitte has been saying for years now that if you're going to invest in sports, if you want to make money in sports, you need to be investing in women's sports. This is where you're going to be making the money. I'm kind of tired of talking about attendance records at sporting events. People like women's sports. But the Nebraska volleyball game outside was thrilling. But anywhere you look, there is some kind of record around women's sports being broken. People are going to women's games, right? But they're also just watching them all the time. So this is Nielsen, Nielsen ratings. Interest in women's sports is growing at a meteoric pace, right? Deloitte has said that this is the year women's sports across the planet, they will break the $1 billion barrier. They're going to make $1 billion in revenue around women's sports this year. Actually, more than that. It's here. It's here. At the same time, media coverage for women's sports has nearly tripled in 5 years. More of that, please. Tripling, if you're at 3% and you triple, more. There's a reason they wrote it like this. But still, incredible. It's been this for many, many decades. It was very stagnant at how much women's coverage there was we were getting. Cheryl Cookie and her team, where's Cheryl? Indiana? Where's Cheryl? Anyway, her team for decades, they have done this longitudinal study of how little media coverage is actually for women's sports. And so the idea that that would shift it all, it has been literally the same for decades. Sorry to the men in the room. I don't want only men covering this. I think we need the voices here, right? This is like one of the most important things happening at this moment. And those other things are important, but we're talking about policy here. We're talking about actual laws being passed. Where I live, where you live. There are material changes being made to the lives of trans children in this country around their inclusion in sport. And we have this sort of both sidesism happening around this. This is a New York Times piece that literally is doing it here. It's not good enough, if you ask me. What we need is we need people who will go and talk to the trans kids and find out about their experiences and bring that to the table, because we literally have legislators who are controlling this conversation. We need the diverse voices. This is my friend Katie Barnes. They're non-binary, have written beautifully on this topic for many years now. Leah Thomas was the flashpoint around which we had a lot of debate in the last couple years, a swimmer. And the first time that Leah decided to sit down on camera was with Katie. And I was like, of course. Like, we have made a world where this person probably feels profoundly unsafe. If she wants to tell her story, of course she's going to go to a non-binary sports reporter who's done incredible work on this topic. Like, that should be an avenue. That should be a place that that person can go in order to tell their story. Again, kudos to ESPN for giving my friend Katie a job. I know that people have a lot of feelings and emotions around the inclusion of trans athletes. Me too. This book that Katie wrote, it just came out. It is so smart. Like, if you really care about this topic, if you want to be pushed on this topic, if you want to think deeply about this topic, this book is how to do it. I highly, highly recommend it. We can talk about it more if you guys want to, of course. But we really need to do better in sports media around this particular issue and who is telling these stories. Obviously, I care about gendered violence. I was like, this is always the most depressing thing. And I do it all the time. Like, let me Google recent stories. There'll probably be a couple. 4 NHL players have been arrested. There's a 5th player involved too. He just wasn't in the NHL anymore. In Canada for a case from when they were in junior hockey. Wild to me that the headlines are about the police apologizing for their how they handled this case, but there it is. International soccer, we have Barcelona backing away from one of its famous stars. An NFL cornerback has said that he was sexually assaulted by his trainer. That came out, I think, 2 days ago. I didn't even know about this. This is a new one for me. This came out end of last year. It's just like, it doesn't matter where you look, right? Premier League team. Who does Greenwood play for? United? Well, anyway, they're having trouble figuring out what to do with their football players who are accused. Good on Charles Barkley. I woke up to like 18 text messages from people like, did you see Charles Barkley? Which is not a thing that happens to me a lot. But there have been multiple incidents in the NBA around domestic violence in the last year or so, and Charles Barkley decided that he was going to quiz Adam Silver on television about it. I don't know that I want it necessarily to be Charles Barkley leading that conversation, but kudos to him. And then here we are back at Safe Sport. This is 2 days ago. Good on Senators still questioning this. But when I think about gendered violence, which obviously is my wheelhouse and I think about it too much, there are so many more people doing this work than when I started doing this work. But there are also only so many people that are doing this work in a way that I think is good and careful. I can almost name them because people contact me and they want someone who can help them tell a story. And I have like my little short list. And I would just like that to be like a really long list one day. So I'm hopeful. And if I'm anything, I'm consistent. So I've written about this, right? That like this is going to get better through diversity, through investment, through education. I'm hopeful. Okay. Olympic and World Cup politics. We're in a moment, y'all. Russia just the other day lost its appeal with the IOC. You know, it's not allowed to appear as Russia in international competitions. French lawmakers are calling on the committee to sanction Israel. Then we have the op-eds that are like, Israel and Russia are different. Like, this is a big conversation right now. And I'm with my friend Shireen on this. The IOC needs to get ready. Like, we all need to get ready that this is going to be a conversation. As it says on the little subtitle there, like, we're already having disruptions of play around the world around this issue. And I'm very nervous about how sports media is going to handle talking about this. I mean, media in general is not great at talking about this. Like, I find this so fascinating. I was thinking about Qatar. Do y'all know what sports washing is? This idea that you put on sporting events in order to sort of massage your reputation. So you put it on, everyone loves it, and they then think much better of your country, of your culture, of whatever. So you use sports to wash your reputation. People accuse and were correct about Russia and the Sochi Olympics. This happens all the time. And so we had a huge discussion going into Qatar around sports washing, rightfully so. At the same time, there was a lot of pushback from the Arab world, from the Muslim world, from brown people that were like, the West only cares when they get to point their finger in a certain direction. But the West is about to host the World Cup and the Olympics, and we got some problems here. And I think it will be really interesting to see, it'll be interesting to see how American sports media, I imagine sports media from overseas will have plenty to say about this. But it'll be interesting to see how Americans are handling this and what perspective they are thinking about and talking about the issues here as we see them play out in two mega events right here. Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm almost done. Andrea's not yet gotten her hook out. All right, I'm gonna read this part because I wanted to get all my words right. Okay, so with all of this setup about the focus of my career in sports journalism, the state of the field as it contracts in ways that frankly freak me out, the historical and continued lack of diversity within sports media, and the issues that are at the fore for journalists covering athletes in sports these days, I have now finally made it around to the topic of my talk. Thank you for going on that journey with me. I think of social justice as fairness. I think about it as inclusion, as equitable resources, as bringing everyone forward and everyone up together. So I want to talk briefly at the end here about it as part of my journalism, how I practice journalism, and how I think about the practice of journalism. One thing I learned very quickly in this work is that being a woman who wants to mitigate forms of gendered violence and wants to have difficult conversations about what accountability of harm can look like, what it should look like, that gets me labeled as a social justice warrior or someone with an agenda. The same thing happens to me when I want to talk about women's sports. I cannot escape these labels. They are attached to me no matter what I do or what I say. Being in this body marks me as an outsider, as an agitator. That's fine by me. I often remark that women's sports are inherently political in their very existence, and I mean political there with a lowercase p. Because a woman walking onto a pitch or a court or a track in order to participate in sports is political, because the entire sporting structure, the modern sporting structure, was built not to include her. This is true of any marginalized group in sports. The modern version of sport on almost all levels was created specifically to exclude huge swaths of people. It was and remained for a long time, and in many ways still remains, a space for cis, white, hetero, able-bodied men to compete against each other. Anywhere that any other kind of athlete appears in sports today, someone has fought a battle to make that happen. Sports media has long reflected this exclusion built into sports, and it often reflects it now. So this brings me to my first point in how I think about journalism. I don't believe in objectivity. I don't get the luxury of objectivity, of being seen as objective. Objectivity as an idea, much like modern sports, was created by, and it was really for, cis, white, hetero, able-bodied men. Who gets to be objective? Who gets to be seen as objective? Certainly not me when I'm reporting on gendered violence. And again, that's fine by me. I don't think I can be objective. I don't think anyone can be objective. In the same way, I believe that we all have biases, but we cannot possibly shed them completely by simply stating that we no longer have them. That's a fool's errand. We all bring our subjective experiences, our embodied and lived lives with us to our analysis and the narratives we write. They shape what we are curious about, what questions we ask, what stories we seek, what voices we privilege. So I reject the idea of objectivity. I also find myself wanting to constantly push on the idea of the status quo, especially within a space like sports that is conservative. And again, I mean that with a little c. So what I mean by sports being conservative is that sports loves rules, tradition, the way things have always been. There's a nostalgic quality to our love of sports, a way of seeing it connected to the past. And so sports often resists change. But then once something does change, that new rule or practice or custom takes on the feeling of having always existed, and that it will continue to always exist in that way. This is the conservatism of sports, and why I always want to question why things are the status quo in sports. What are alternatives to how things are done? What are bigger, more inclusive ways of imagining what sport could be instead of getting stuck in what is? Journalism is a fun avenue for this. So what I will leave you with tonight is what I do believe in, what is at the core of all of the work that I do, and that is fairness. This is my guiding principle. This is my word. I don't think we can be objective or drop all of our biases, but I do think we can and we should all practice fairness in the journalism that we do. Sure, there are legal reasons that you always contact anyone you are naming or writing about in a piece to give them a chance to tell their side of the story, and those are valid reasons. But there are strong ethical reasons for doing this too. It is the fair thing to do. We try our damnedest to get all of our facts right, to corroborate them, to check them over repeatedly before publishing, because to do so is to be fair to all involved and to the readers who trust us. We have other journalists, editors, sometimes lawyers, read pieces ahead of time to question and push on our framing, our word choice, what voices we have centered, because that forces us to really think about the decisions that we have made and why, and to think thoroughly about how fair we've been in the telling of their story. It is the practice of fairness that marries journalism to social justice. I think a fairer sports media landscape would be more diverse, would make sure to tell stories from all sorts of angles, would constantly remind itself that all the people we are writing about are, in fact, people, and would never forget that sports can harm as much as they can inspire if we leave money and power unchecked and unquestioned. I believe in fairness and in journalism, and how together they allow us to imagine the possibilities for more justice in sports. Thank you. What? I can do questions. I'm happy to, you guys can tell, I'm happy to talk. Anyone have questions? Thank you for sitting through all of that. I appreciate it. Yeah, Chris. I think there are microphones. Hold on. This is my friend Chris Bills, who used to live in Austin with me, and he was a sports reporter covering Austin FC, and he worked for one of these independent outlets that recently shuttered. Chris is now back in Ohio, so
Yeah.
This is a thrill for me.
Oh, Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, I guess maybe that's where I want to take things is what you were going through, like the contraction of sports
I know. I
media.
feel like I should have warned you.
No, it's all right. It was just a little PTSD.
Yeah.
But just like in your own experience, I think one of the things that I've always appreciated about your work is it does show up in so many different places, but those places are going away, and I'm sure you've had to adjust that. But like I'm sure outlets come to you sometimes, but I think that you have also reached a place where you've been able to place things in places based on what you're covering. How have you adjusted that? And like, I guess, how do you see where the best place is for you at this current point to place those types of stories?
So I haven't had to. So I've been working on my dissertation. I only wrote one thing last year. It was about Billie Jean King, Battle of the Sexes turning 50. I convinced Texas Monthly to let me write it there because I know all of them, and the battle happened in the Astrodome. So I was like, it's a Texas angle. But I totally used, I was like, who would let me? Who could I easily convince? And I was right. And so I am very worried about like when I do finish this dissertation and I want to go back out there and tell stories, I feel like it's going to be a brand new sort of field that I'm working in. So I don't know at this point. Like if I was going to try to place a story today, I don't even know where I would start. I would have to really look at like what still exists at this point. Who do I know that still exists? Like I had a lot of contacts and a lot of them don't do this anymore. There's a group for freelance journalists. I'm a freelance journalist. I don't work on a staff, and they have like lists of editors, and I imagine myself just like scrolling and seeing who I know on the list. But I have tried really hard I obviously write for a lot of sports places, but I try really hard to write in places that are not sports places, and I'm wondering about them filling in the vacuum. Like if we're gonna see just more sports coverage in other places that we hadn't thought of it before. And so I'll probably start seriously considering that, even though I've done that in the past.
Just curious, what is your feeling on this whole NIL thing? Especially recently, a judge just ruled that against the NCAA that colleges can use NIL as part of the recruitment process. And there's even been other states now that are trying to get NIL approved for high school students.
Yeah, I saw Florida, obviously, trying to do that. I mean, this is the NCAA like made its bed and now it's lying down in it, right? I am for name, image, likeness. I think it is weird that we have like segregated off this group of people and said that like you cannot make money off of this. I am a pro paying the players though. Like I think you should be paid for your labor in general. But we can always easily see like where the corruption is going to come from, right? And I am really interested in how Title IX intersects with all of this stuff. That is absolutely not determined yet. I've seen very smart people writing about it in all sorts of ways. I'm generally for it, but these collectives are really fascinating because there's all this stuff around the IRS saying that like you can't, they were trying to be nonprofits. These people, they'll take everything you give them, every little inch. I get why coaches are frustrated by it, but again, I think they absolutely have created the situation that they're now having to deal with, but they're also like drinking out of a fire hose around this. I don't have anything smarter than that to say, but I do think it is like the story in college ball, and I just think we really have to think of, I think it's a labor story, and for me, that is the lens. Thank you. Oh, yes. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Tiffany Taylor. I am the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion. I have the honor of being very deeply involved in the Roger Brown story and the way in which the University of Dayton has continued to reimagine his story and his experience with our university. I want to thank our president, Dr. Eric Spina, for continuing to push for this story to be told and for our students to have an opportunity to learn from this story. I think that's really the essence of who he was and the legacy that he continues to leave, not only for the University of Dayton, but other communities across the country. I want to thank the folks in the audience who had a hand in the planning of this. If you could just raise your hands. I think she's my left and my right hand in this. Andrea Wade, could not have done this without you. And obviously, thank you. I'm looking at Jessica and I was like, who's she saying thank you to? But thank you, Jessica, for coming and spending this quality time with our students, with our faculty and our staff and our community. I've learned just in our short time period together, so I appreciate not only your time with us, but the blood, sweat, and tears that you put into your work. You are making a difference, and I'm proud to say that I had a chance to spend time with you, and I look forward to continuing to see the legacy that you leave in the work that you do. Thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful evening.